Hello there, Misfits. I'm Kate.
And I'm Kale.
Welcome to Horrorwood.
Horrorwood. The amount of times I've practiced that word,
I actually feel like
Horror, is kind of slutty.
I didn't say it very well that time. But that's the name of the podcast, so that's what it is. We're sticking to it.
Horrorwood.
That's closer.
Thank you.
It's our debut episode, and I'm excited.
Yay.
Are you excited?
I'm stoked.
I'm also kind of nervous, but that's okay.
Oh, I'm hella nervous.
So we decided for our first episode to have the subject be someone iconic, legendary, and deeply missed. And it's none other than Marilyn Monroe.
NJB, baby.
I really wanted this to be one episode, but there's too much. Like, as soon as I started doing research, I was like, you know what? And I texted Kaylee and I said, yeah, sorry, I think it's going to be a two-parter. And you were like, yeah, I figured. And then when you got here, I was like, yeah, so I think it's going to be 3 parts because there's just, I mean, in order to do it justice, you can't just gloss over the details. Like, there are some diehard Maryland fans out there, and like, I want to do it right. I can't, gloss over anything. So, we are going to get into it. I'm going to talk a lot about her background, like her early years, and then like getting into her career, because I feel like so much of where she came from and uh, what she, the relationships that she had in life and just, how she was treated throughout her career had a huge impact on her death. And that's what we're here to talk about, is death. So I think it's important to get some background first. So, are you ready?
Ready.
Okay, here we go. So, Norma Jean Mortensen was born on June 1st, 1926, in Los Angeles, California, to her mother, Gladys. Norma was Gladys's third child. Her first 2 children were with former husband Jasper Newton Baker. I do like the name Jasper. They had married when Gladys was just 15 years old, and he was 21. But I mean, it was 1917, so, things were different. My grandma was 17 when she married my granddad, and he was 25. And they were inseparable the rest of their lives because love.
Because love.
But unlike my grandparents, Gladys and Jasper's love unfortunately did not last. Gladys worked as a film cutter at a movie studio, so basically like in editing. And one day she came home from work early to find Jasper in bed with another woman.
The goal.
I know. They got in a huge fight, obviously. Okay, first off, when I typed huge, it autocorrected to hug. So it said they got in a hug fight. I was like, I wish all fights were hug fights.
I'm down for a hug fight.
So they get in this huge fight, and Gladys was like, you need to get the fuck out of here. Direct quote. So he left, but then snuck back in later and kidnapped their 2 babies. So Gladys did everything she could to get them back. She searched and searched for them and finally traced them to Kentucky, where Jasper was from. She used all her savings to hitchhike across the country to Kentucky to get them back. By the time she got there, though, she was broke and exhausted because, of all the hitchhiking. And when she found her kids, she saw that they were really well off. Jasper had remarried. They lived in a really nice house. The kids were happy and doing great. And when Gladys saw this, she decided not to ask Jasper for anything, not money, not the kids, nothing, because she knew that he could give them a better life than she could. Which, like, when you think about that, shows just how much she loved her kids, because she spent her entire savings hitchhiking across the freaking country and then saw that they would have a better life with Jasper than with her.
That's called a
So
mother's love.
exactly, because that is a gut-wrenching decision. Like, I can't even imagine. So another factor that convinced Gladys the kids should stay with Jasper was she was already aware that mental illness ran in her family. Her father had been taken away to a mental hospital where he eventually died. Her grandmother had also been taken away to a mental hospital where she died. And her brother, who also suffered from mental illness, ended up dying by suicide, unfortunately. So I'm sure she was concerned she might suffer the same fate. And
She did, right?
she, well, yeah, and we'll get into that. But I don't think she wanted, her kids to be in that situation. So obviously, again, this was the early 1900s, and mental health resources just weren't what they are today. So Gladys went back to California without the kids and continued working as a film cutter. And it wasn't long before she would meet and eventually marry Martin Edward Mortensen. He went by his middle name, Edward. They married in October of 1924, but separated just 7 months later in May of 1925 because Gladys had taken a liking to her boss, one Mr. Charles Stanley Gifford. Which I gotta say, so I saw a picture of Charles Stanley Gifford, and I'll post it. Um, I get it. I get it, Gladys.
Handsome.
Charles had it going on. Oh, the most handsome. So in June of 1926, Norma Jean was born, and Gladys wrote her last name as Mortensen on her birth certificate. But remember, Gladys and Edward had been separated for more than a year at the time of Norma's birth because they split in May of 1925.
Did he know that he was the father?
Who, Charles or Edward?
Edward.
No, because Edward, they had already split.
Oh.
But she used his last name on the birth certificate because, the illegitimacy of it all.
Oh.
So, yeah. So,
Fascinating from day
the
one.
exactly. The question of who was Norma's biological father remained a mystery for decades, and it was just recently confirmed, like literally a few weeks ago, based on DNA evidence that, are you ready for it?
Ready.
Charles Stanley Gifford, you are the father.
Oh.
So the boss she had her little fling with, produced Norma Jean. They used familial DNA to determine that, confirm that he was the father. They used a saliva sample from Charles's great grandchild and then a strand of Marilyn Monroe's
This
hair
is
to
very
figure it
Maury
out.
Povich.
Oh, I was trying to do my Maury Povich voice. Did that come through?
It did.
Okay, I'm gonna take your silence as a no. So unfortunately, when Gladys told Charles she was pregnant, he abandoned her, and Norma Jean never got to know her biological father. Despite that Gladys had been married to Edward, she often used her first husband's name, Jasper's last name, of Baker.
Yep.
So that's why you hear Norma Jean Baker a lot. So Gladys's mother, Della, insisted Norma be baptized with the last name Baker. And she thought that that would help hide the fact that Norma was an illegitimate child, which I'm not really sure like how that would hide that fact because she wasn't with Jasper, but she also wasn't with Edward anymore. So I don't know why changing the name from Mortensen to Baker. Maybe just because
It's easier
Gladys
to
used it.
say. I don't know. It's 2
Well,
syllables.
maybe. But I guess because Gladys used it, and so, Della wanted to
Match.
keep that. Yeah. So, shortly after Norma's birth, Gladys struggled with taking care of Norma and keeping a job. So, she made the difficult decision to put Norma in the care of another couple.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Did she have any other like close encounters with her other children? What do we get to that? What's happening with them now? Do they know they have a
So,
sibling?
So unfortunately, the son, it was as a daughter and son. The son died, I think, when he was like 13. Um, but the daughter, Bernice, she did learn about Norma Jean, and they did have a bit of a relationship later in life. Um, but yeah, unfortunately, the boy died,
Wow.
so Norma did not get to know him. And also, because I'm talking about her early life and she hasn't changed her name yet, I'm gonna refer to her as Norma just because, like, just to keep it more clear. And then once she changes her name, then I'll call her Marilyn. But right now, she's still Norma.
Norma it is.
Norma it is. So I was gonna try not to do that, and I had to. I was like, "Oh my god, I have to clear this voice." All right, so she had to put Norma in the care of someone else, so she paid the letter carrier, so basically the mailman, $5
Is
a week to take care of
is
Norma.
that where that always comes from? Like, if a kid doesn't look like the dad, they say it's the mailman's?
I mean, I think it's just, that's just like if the woman had an affair with a mailman,
Oh, okay.
but I don't think it comes from this particular story, but I like where your head's at. So So $5 back then would be about $84 today. So, like, around 84 bucks a week to take care of her kid. And, like, can you imagine handing over your child to the mailman? Like, don't get me wrong, I love our mailman. His name is Keith, and he's the best, but, shout out to Keith. But I don't know that I would be willing to turn a child over to him. Just be like, "Hey, can you just, like, watch her for a bit?"
I mean, that's a lot of stamps. I don't know.
That's a lot of stamps. Um, so Gladys, she was just doing what she felt she had to do, you know? So she was trying to do the right thing. The couple that was taking care of Norma, their names were Ida Bolender and Albert Wayne Bolender. And they already had children of their own, and they didn't have a ton of money, which is why they took Norma in because they basically just needed that money. By the
And
age
what's
of
one more
7,
kid? Let's be honest.
I
When you have
mean, yeah.
one, you know.
And I think that, yeah, I think they had a couple before Norma came along. By the age of 7, Norma was already working hard in the home. Like, she had a lot of chores. She kind of was,
Modern day Cinderella?
I mean, a little bit.
Well, I guess
Yeah.
it wouldn't be
Like,
modern, but back in the day
well,
Cinderella?
back in the day, Cinderella, I mean, yeah, she would scrub the floors and do the dishes and run errands for the family. So she became like, I don't know, it was like a lot of child labor that I just felt like they were getting paid to take care of her, but then they were like, "Hey, go do this." So, since Norma had been in this couple's care since shortly after her birth, she assumed they were her family and she considered them her parents and the children her siblings. And she said she loved hanging out with her dad, aka the mailman. And in the mornings, she would sit on the edge of the tub while he was shaving and getting ready for work. And she would just ask him questions like, "How many people are in the world?" Or "Which way is south?" Like, those kinds of questions that all little kids have,
And that the mailman
and
clearly has answers for. I mean, he gets around.
he does. He knows which way is south, he
I
has to.
hope.
And she said, and this kinda broke my heart when I read it, she said he was the only one who ever answered her questions, which is just like, oh. Then one day, she walks into the room where the woman she had known as her mom was, and she said, "Mama," and the woman just turned to her, Ida, turned to her and said, "Don't call me mama. You're old enough to know better. I'm not related to you in any way. You just bored hair."
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty
She was
cutthroat.
7 she was 7 years old. Can you imagine?
No.
Like, everything she'd known at that point was a lie. So she eventually did get to meet her mom, and, like, Gladys would come and visit, and then she would be able to go to where Gladys lived, and on the wall in Gladys's place, there was only one photograph, and there were no other pictures anywhere, and it was a photo of a man. Norma didn't know who, but she said that every time she went there, she was just drawn to this picture, and she would just stand and stare at it. She said, quote, "I felt very warm toward the picture."
Was it her father?
And,
Was it
well, then
Jesus?
one day Well, it wasn't Jesus. And then one day while she was visiting, Norma was staring at the picture as per usual, and Gladys lifted her up onto a chair so she could get a better look at it and told her, "That's your father." It was a photo of Charles Stanley Gifford.
Maybe it felt like she was staring back at herself.
Ooh, I didn't think about that.
Like she just felt that presence.
I mean, she definitely was drawn to it. And Norma said she was so excited to see who her actual father was, she almost fell off the chair.
Well,
And
I fell
she
I
said,
I fall off the chair regularly, so,
but you do know who your dad is.
here's hoping.
She
Maybe it's the
said,
mailman.
I mean, it could be. It could be all a lie that your parents have been telling you. I mean, quote, "your parents." We don't know.
Except
She
that I look
said
like
she
them.
said well, you do. She said finding out that, that was her father for the first time, she said that was the first time she ever felt happy, and she was 7.
Aw,
Like,
that's
ugh,
crushing.
it is. She described her dad as looking like Clark Gable. She
Ah,
knew, like,
interesting.
movies and stuff, and she knew what movie stars look like, and she immediately thought he looked like Clark Gable because he had, quote, "a lively smile in his eyes."
Listen, that Gable was a
And
looker. He was a little hottie with that little stash.
he was kind of also an ass, though, and we'll talk about that in part 2. But anyway, so, he had she said he had a lively smile in his eyes and a thin mustache, and he wore a hat that was cocked to the side a little bit.
I love a good
I'm
cock.
gonna
Cock to the
I'm gonna
side. Sometimes things come out of my mouth, and then I realize what I've said.
I mean,
Oh.
you know what? It's okay, girl, because Marilyn liked one too, so it's all good. You have that in common.
Speaking of my parents, are they gonna be listening to this? I don't know, I might have to monitor that.
Oh, I can't have my family listen to this. I'm not gonna censor myself, so sorry, mom, if you decide to if you do learn how to pull up a podcast, I don't know that that'll happen.
We have that
Um,
advantage.
true.
Baby boomers.
So so, yeah, I'll post the photo on our Instagram because he does look like Clark Gable, like, it is yeah, it's I see the
Is he
resemblance.
still single?
Well, he's dead, so I guess he's single in the afterlife?
Great,
Who
I'm
knows?
working with Bumble and dead men now, that's
You
wonderful.
know what? I say that he's dead. I need to actually double check that, but I mean, well, yes, he is dead because Norma would be 96 if she was alive right now, so he's dead. I don't even know why I thought that maybe he was alive.
I don't
He's
even know why I was thinking I should date him.
that's for another day. Um, so when Norma asked about him, because obviously she was like, "Okay, that's my dad, I wanna meet him," Gladys told her he'd been killed in an automobile accident in New York. But Norma never believed this, and she was right because he was not dead. Gladys just didn't want to tell her that he'd walked out on them.
Boy, Gladys had some pride.
Yeah. And I mean, like, too, she's just trying to protect Norma. I think she just felt like, well, if she knows that he's dead, maybe that's better than, or if she thinks he's dead, maybe that's better than feeling like he abandoned her.
Mhm.
So, about a year after first seeing his picture, Norma started a scrapbook, and the very first photo she put in it was a picture of Clark Gable because he looked like her father.
Uh-huh.
I'm sure Gladys could tell that Norma was not super happy staying with the mailman and his family. They had kids of their own, so, like, obviously they put their own kids first, and Norma was constantly working and doing chores, and it just wasn't a great situation. And when Norma would visit Gladys, I'm sure they talked about it. Also, mothers just have a sense about these things, you know? So when well, I'm gonna back up. So I think Gladys was already starting to sense that, like, Norma might be time to get her out of that house.
What's the age range at
And,
this point? Beyond 7, we know.
she would have been so what I'm getting ready to go into, like, the story I'm getting ready to go into, I think she's around 11
Okay.
when it happens. Um, so I mean, yeah, she'd been with this family for, a good while. But, things aren't going great. So the time comes that Norma has to have her tonsils out. and there were some complications from the surgery, so she had to stay in the hospital for several days afterwards. And when she got back to the her home slash the mailman's house, the family dog starts barking like crazy because he missed her, obviously. And Norma loved this dog, and
Who
he loved
doesn't love
her.
a
So
dog? Come on.
right? I mean, unless you're allergic, I guess, which I
No,
get.
okay.
And he loved her, so they were both very excited to see each other.
Oh, do we have a name? A dog name?
We do not have a dog name, unfortunately. But
We're
the
gonna call him
next door
Leaf.
neighbor, okay, well, don't get too
Okay.
attached. The next door neighbor was pissed about all the noise. And like, okay, this little girl has just gotten home from the hospital after this like probably traumatizing surgery. She's so excited to be back. The dog is there. He's so happy to see her. She's happy to see him. But of course, the neighbor's getting pissed. So this is a big trigger warning because I, even reading it, I was like, oh my God. So get ready, Kaylee, because
If they
you're gonna
harm the
have a
dog,
problem.
I'm gonna you know what? I'm gonna pull their tonsils out.
Well, you might need to start tracking them down then because you're gonna have some work to do. So the neighbor starts chasing the dog and swung a garden hoe at him. It hit the dog in the back and sliced him in
Oh,
half.
I wasn't ready for that, even
I'm
with the trigger warning.
sorry. And Norma watched it all happen.
Age 11.
Yeah, I mean, I think around 11. She was a little kid. Yeah, and this I mean, and this is like her pet, you know? So, between Norma just being unhappy overall with where she was living and the incident with the dog, Gladys felt she had to get Norma out of that house. So, she found another couple that she paid to take care of her. And they were two actors. Their names were George and Maud Atkinson. And I did see one article that stated this couple had a daughter of their own named Nellie. So I'm assuming Nellie is in the
I
picture.
feel like this might be a it's going to a good route. They're actors,
Well,
which we know that she gets into. They have a daughter named
mhm.
Nellie and Norma. I like it.
I mean, that is cute as fuck. So one day when Gladys went to visit Norma at the home of this new family, she told her she was going to build a house that they could all live in. Gladys, Norma, and the Atkinsons. And George and Maud needed money, and Gladys needed childcare and hated being separated from her daughter. So she came up with this solution. She was like, "This will be great. We'll all live together. I can work, and while you all, watch Norma, and we'll just all be one big happy family." And to her credit, Gladys made it happen. She took out a loan and combined it with her savings from her job at the movie studio, and they got a house and all moved in together. So she was getting it. She worked double shifts to pay for furniture and was just doing the damn thing. She was determined to not have
Tenacity.
things go the way they did with her first two kids. She wanted to, this time around, she's like, I got to get it right.
Make amends, yeah.
So, with the money she earned from her job, Gladys bought what she considered to be the prized possession.
A
In a
couch?
secondhand shop, no. In a secondhand shop, she found a beat up grand piano that had once belonged to the movie star Frederick March. Frederick March was a huge deal at the time. He was at the height of his career. He was already an Academy Award winner for Best Actor for Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And he
Oh,
would later go on to win that award again, as well as 2 Tony Awards for Best Actor. So, like, he was a big deal. Side note, Frederick March, attended the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and while he was there, he was briefly a member of a fraternity named the Ku Klux Klan. It had no
whoa.
Yeah, it had no association with the white supremacist group we now associate with that name.
Those
Um,
also are those aren't Greek letters. I'm confused.
the white suprem Aren't they not? You
I
know what? I
I
don't
don't
know.
know,
I don't know
actually.
my Greek letters.
I was not in the Greek system.
I wasn't either. Um, the white supremacist group at the time was a very small regional organization. And so the
Did they have a name yet? I
school,
mean, did they have was it
they did, but
oh,
I think that they were so small and no one really knew about them yet. So the school never felt a need to change the name. And the thing is, March was actually a very outspoken proponent of the civil rights movement for decades. He was not he was not a racist, a white supremacist. That just wasn't him. And since the once the KKK that we know of became more well known, the fraternity did change the name.
Okay.
Um, but both the University of Wisconsin Oshkosh and the University of Wisconsin Madison had named their theaters after Frederick March. But in 2018, students became aware of reports that March had been in a fraternity called the KKK, and they began protesting and urged the school to remove his name, and they did. And in 2020, the school changed the name to just Theater Arts Center. But he was never
Right.
involved with the KKK. He did so much work in civil rights, and just to have his, sort of legacy kind of stripped away like that, because it's just, yeah, it's a lot. So Gladys finding this piano that once belonged to this big star was huge. And it would be like if you walked into Goodwill and there was Lin-Manuel Miranda's piano.
Yeah, I
And they were
mean,
just like, "Yeah, it's kinda beat up and looks like shit.
one
You
of my
want it?"
dreams is to have a baby grand piano.
And if it had belonged to Lin-Manuel Miranda, I think you'd be like, "Fuck yes, I need this in my home." And you would, work double shifts
Yeah,
for
it
that.
would be my couch. Mhm.
Yeah, I'd be like, "Take all my money. Here you go." So Gladys gave the piano to Norma as a gift and intended for her to have piano lessons. She
Oh.
dreamed of entertaining guests in their new home while Norma played the piano and everyone would sit around and listen. This was Gladys's dream. Unfortunately, though, her dream was never realized because signs of mental illness
Oh,
had
this is
already
where it
begun to
happens.
show in Gladys.
Mm.
Yes. And one night, as Norma, George, Maud, and presumably Nellie sat at home, they heard a huge commotion coming from the stairwell. And in her autobiography, My Story, I used her book, My Story, that she wrote, Marilyn Monroe wrote, with the help of a friend, a lot, and I'll link it in the show notes because it was a great source. So in this book, she describes this night as hearing all kinds of noise, like someone had fallen down the stairs. So George gets up to check to see what's going on because he thinks someone's hurt, and he finds Gladys. She's standing upright. She hadn't fallen. She was just causing a ruckus, probably banging against the walls and shit. And
Was she
she
manic?
was she was both screaming and laughing. So he and Maud tried to shield Norma from seeing her mother like this, but I mean, they were all right there in the house together. It's kind of hard not to see what's going on. So they sent for a police and an ambulance. Oh, she was, oh my, okay. So she was 8 years old at this time. So actually, the dog thing happened when she was just 8. So just to send you further into a
Yeah, I'm
a dark hole.
very angry about that.
So she at 8 years old, Norma watched as authorities took her mother out of the house screaming and laughing, and they took her to a mental hospital.
And is that where she stayed, or does she come back?
She stayed there for a time.
Okay.
Um, it's interesting to note that both Norma's grandfather and great-grandmother also had spells of screaming and laughing before they were taken to mental hospitals. So just an interesting
Genetic
thing.
factor, right.
Once her mother was taken away, Norma and the Atkinsons lost everything because without Gladys's income,
They couldn't
George
keep
and
the
Maud couldn't afford
house.
to take care of Norma or keep the house. So the house, the furniture,
The
the
baby grand piano?
piano,
Oh.
yep, all of it was gone, and Norma was put into an orphanage.
Oh.
She said she was always haunted by that night with her mother, and when she would go to bed, all she could hear was, quote, "the terrible noise on the stairs and my mother screaming and laughing as they led her out of the home she had tried to build for me."
Oh
Ugh.
my gosh, that's heart-wrenching for a
Yeah.
child to
And
see that. And I mean, so my day job, obviously, is a teacher,
mhm.
of students with special needs, namely emotional disturbance. So I can resonate in the understanding of how this could be traumatic for a child.
Oh, yeah, and, like, just that's the thing is all the trauma that she went through as a kid, like, it all comes
Oh,
back.
of course. You I mean,
It's like you just see these patterns being set up, and she's being set up to to have a really hard life. Um,
she's what, 8 and she's already had a really hard
yeah,
life.
and so this is just a side note that I love. She said she never forgot about that house, and once she was older and started
Did
making a
she
little
buy it?
money, well, not the house, she tracked down the Frederick March piano in an old auction room, and she bought that. And it was repainted and restored, and she kept it in her Hollywood home, and she said it played beautifully. So it's just like, oh,
I love a good
for
keynote.
for the next 8 years, Norma would float between the orphanage, foster homes, and her Aunt Grace's home. So her Aunt Grace wasn't actually her aunt, but her mom's best friend, and that was the thing, like, every woman that took care of her, she called aunt. So, like,
Okay.
foster
Yeah,
families that she went into, they were aunt and uncle, but the kids of the foster parents, she considered her siblings. So they were her sisters and brothers,
okay.
but then the parents were aunt. So Grace was Gladys's best friend. They had worked together, and, so to Norma, she was Aunt Grace. And when Gladys was taken away, Grace became Norma's guardian, but financially, she didn't have the means to care for her full time, which is why Norma kind of floated in between homes.
Got it. Okay.
Grace would look after her, yeah. Grace would look after her as often as she could, but since, they didn't have much money, they basically survived on stale bread and milk. The 2 of them would
Very
stand in line
college-like.
for I right, but unfortunately, like,
It was forced.
that
That
was
yeah.
just their life. The 2 of them would stand in line for hours outside of the bakery waiting to get a sackful of old bread for 25 cents,
It's like the
which is
Jimmy
about
John's, like, day-old
$5 today.
bread, right?
And I'm not sure if it was just a day, like, it was stale, but that is what they survived on. So during this time that Grace was her guardian, Norma floated between, uh, like I said, her house, the orphanage, and various foster families, and in the span of 8 years, between the time she was 8 and
She had a
16,
lot of aunties.
she was placed with 9 different
Wow.
families.
Wow.
Yeah. Most of these families had children of their own, so, again, Norma came last. And while the other kids were getting new toys and clothes, little Norma was stuck with her orphanage outfit, which was a faded blue skirt with a white blouse. And she was given 2 of these by the orphanage so that she could alternate. While
Oh,
one was dirty,
get
she had a
washed.
clean one. Norma said she never felt loved as a
Mm.
child and often felt lonely and wanted to die. And to cheer herself up, she would daydream of attracting the attention of others and having people look at her and say her name. Which makes sense because if you were not given much attention as a kid, like, yeah, you are gonna dream about that. You're gonna dream about the day when, everyone is looking at you and loving you and
And
everyone
you're the
thinks that
bombshell
you're
that you are, which is what
exactly,
motivates people
exactly.
to, better their life.
And you wanna know something else she dreamed about?
Of course.
Taking her clothes off in church.
Well, that's one godly way of getting attention.
I mean, I went to church as a kid too, and I would also daydream because my mind would just wander, but, like, I daydreamed about things like running up and down the aisle screaming and to see what people would do or, like, suddenly bursting into song when it was really quiet. But no, little Norma Jean fantasized about taking all her clothes off. She said she would sit in the pew and pray to God that he would stop her from getting naked.
Well, in her defense, I mean, Jesus was practically naked on the cross, so maybe it's just like she felt comfortable that way.
Well, she said it wasn't about being naked in church. She had no it was like there was no sexual
Oh,
connotation
okay.
to it.
Okay.
She was just and this is what will break your heart. She was just ashamed of the clothes she
She
wore
was
because she was
wearing
poor.
oh,
Because again,
She had no Sunday dress. That was huge back then, like,
yeah,
huge.
she only had her blue faded skirt and white blouse that she literally wore every single day. And people assumed she was wearing the same like, just the same clothes, like, not knowing there were 2 of each, and Norma would wash them herself, so they were always clean, but since they were identical, people were just like, "Oh, she wears the same clothes over and over."
That's a definite, like, that's one of those moments where you realize, like, what you have and what to
Yeah,
be grateful
absolutely.
for, and, the realistic manner of this still is a thing. I mean, this still is happening.
Well, yeah, absolutely, and I like, I just the fact that she would wash them herself every day and because she wanted to, like, feel, like, clean, basically,
And taken care
and
of.
people, that was lost on people, like, it's like she just couldn't
So
win,
from an
so
early age, she really was a survivalist. Like, she
oh, 100%. I mean, the fact that she was just constantly set up to
fail in this
fail
system.
in a way,
Mhm.
but she was
Persevered.
always, trying to yeah, she persevered. She was I would say she was a survivor, but, like, all she was just good about taking care of herself and seeing things through and just trying to get to the next thing, you know?
Yeah.
Um, so every other week, an inspector from the orphanage would visit these foster families she was with to do, like, a, quote, "wellness check." I put "wellness" in quotes because, like, literally, these checks consisted of the inspector looking at the bottoms of Norma's shoes, and if they weren't worn through, Norma was
She was
considered to
okay.
be thriving.
Wow.
So the
Wow.
bar was low. Yeah. Saturday nights were typically bath nights because it was the late 30s, early 40s around this time, and these foster families didn't have much money, which is why they're fostering in the first place, and water costs money. So they'd have one night a week where everyone in the family would take turns taking a bath. And because there wasn't much money, it was unheard of to change the bath water in the tub before the next person would bathe.
So by the time she got in there, it was
Exactly. The
dark,
whole
mucky
family
water.
used the same bath water, and because she always came last, she was the last one to
I
bathe.
am counting
So
my
she had to
blessings.
bathe in water that 5 or 6 people had already bathed in. Can you imagine?
I mean, it's not like
Like,
you're not even bathing at that point.
yeah,
You're playing
you're
in a
just
mud
like,
pit at that point.
"Oh, gross." Like, I mean, sometimes even sitting in my own bath water, I'm like, "Alright, this is nasty." 5 or 6 other people before you? Yeah.
But to her, she
She
probably felt like she was getting clean because she only bathed once a week.
I don't think she felt like she was getting clean. I think she was just I'm sure she was probably glad to get something.
Rinsed off.
Yeah, but I don't think she ever felt clean. She got in trouble at one of the houses she stayed at because she used the bathroom at night and flushed the toilet, and the family told her she was using up too much money and to only flush the toilet once in the morning.
Wow.
And again,
Things we take for
it's not like
granted.
everyone had their own private toilet to use. Everyone is sharing. So if you're not flushing, I mean, just imagine what is in that
There's a lot of
toilet.
poopsies in there.
A lot of poopsies. So she got in trouble a lot, but only because she was constantly being accused of things she did not
Sounds
do.
like a real
Sh
misfit.
she I mean, she always felt that she was. So she was constantly being accused of stealing, which she wasn't, hitting other kids, she was not, destroying property, she didn't. And when this happened, whatever family she was staying with would send her back to the orphanage. And, like, it was generally other kids that were
She was a
blaming her for
target.
shit. And yeah, the thing was, like, she wasn't doing any of that. And then she'd get kicked out of the house. But when she was staying with a family, she was always working. She did not have time to do the things that she was so often accused of doing because she was busy scrubbing floors and washing clothes. Like, she didn't have time to go out and steal something, you
She
know?
literally was like a cinder girl, like
She
Cinderella.
was. She was. She would often daydream to make the work go by a little easier and faster,
I do
and
that too.
she said, quote, "I dreamed of myself becoming so beautiful that people would turn to look at me when I passed. I dreamed of myself walking proudly in beautiful clothes and being admired by everyone.
She
And I'm
foreshadowed.
like, right?
That's awesome.
But child labor and being treated as an afterthought and being accused of things she didn't do, these were not the worst things she would suffer through, unfortunately. When she was just 8 years old, okay, and this is rough. She lived with a family who rented a room out to a man that they called Mr. Kimmel.
If he
That's
has a
just how
dog
he's
and
referred
something
to.
happens to it, I might have to go take a reset break.
Uh, there's no
All
dog involved in this
right.
one,
We can
but it's
proceed
not
then.
good. It's not good.
Oh, no.
One day, little Norma was walking down the hallway, and when she passed by his room, he told her to come in.
Oh, no. We are mm-mm.
Yep. So she assumed he wanted her to run an errand or something because that's what was always expected of her. She cleaned, she ran errands. So she asked, "Oh, where do you want me to go, Mr. Kimmel?" And he replied, "No place." And then he closed the door
Oh,
behind her and locked it. So, yes, another warning here. This has to do with sexual assault. So, this shit stain of a man, Mr. Kimmel, molested Norma. She said she kicked and fought as hard as she could, but he was so much bigger and stronger than she was, and he wouldn't let her go. Again, she was 8 years old.
there's a fiery place in hell for
I sure
eh,
hope so.
yeah.
I sure hope so. Immediately, Norma went to her caretakers to tell them what happened, but the woman, quote unquote, caring for her, told her, "Don't you dare say anything against Mr. Kimmel. He's my star boarder." So basically, the family was making a lot of money off this asshole and didn't want anything to jeopardize that. So, a week after this horrific crime against this innocent child, everyone in the house, including Mr. Kimmel, went to a religious revival meeting.
Mm, that's one way
That's
to
one thing
shake it
about, like,
off.
all these families, like, a lot of them were super religious, which, I mean, believe
I
what you
mean, define
want, but
religion
when
at that point.
yeah, exactly. Like, when you use religion to do harm to others, that's when it's a problem. So, the woman of the house insisted Norma come with them. They all gathered together with, like, all these other people attending this evangelical meeting, and the preacher asked that all sinners come up to the altar and
Bye,
repent.
Kimmel.
Well, little Norma bolts to the front
Oh,
and immediately starts telling everything that happened with Mr. Kimmel because she thought
she
she
was
had
the
done something wrong.
sinner. Oh.
She thought it was her fault and that this had happened to her, which obviously it was not. Victims of assault do not cause the assault, just to be clear. Unfortunately, though, no one heard her describe what had happened to her because several other people had run up at the same time, confessing
Confessing.
their sins. So everyone was talking at once and it completely drowned her out. So no one even like heard what this shitbag did. So as Norma got a little older, she began to develop, and she developed early and before any of her peers. At 12 years old, she looked like she was 17, truly. However, no one really noticed the change in her body because she was still
Wearing the same
wearing
clothes,
the
basically?
same faded blue skirt and white blouse that the orphanage had provided. She had to walk to school, which was 2 miles because the bus cost 5 cents and she couldn't afford it. She said she hated the walk, she hated school, she didn't have any friends, no one at school talked to
I mean,
her
this
or offered to
as a
walk home
teacher
with
breaks
her.
my heart. This is I mean,
I
and it's
mean,
still
just as
happening
a
today, right, as a
human,
human, yeah.
like, I can't handle when any kid is rude to another kid. Like, I just can't I I just can't.
When I worked inner city New York, there were several kids who were wearing the same clothes over and over again because they only had 2 outfits
Yeah.
provided by the school,
Yeah.
and so it's just sad that, like, decades later, some of this stuff is still going on.
Oh, 100%. And she like, no kids talked to her, like, no one ever invited her over, for, like, a slumber party or anything like that. They just saw her as, quote, "a poor girl who never smiled." Well, yeah, what do you have to smile about at that point? Like, it was bad. Kids constantly made fun of her and called her names. Like, I just wanna go back in time and reach out to her and give her a big hug and just say, "Just wait, girl. Like,
Yeah.
you're gonna it's gonna get better. It's gonna get worse again, but it is gonna get better." So, one morning before school, Norma saw that both of her blouses were torn, and she only had the 2
And this is
blouses.
after developing.
Yes.
Mm.
And she knew if she stopped to get them fixed on her way to school, she'd be late for school. So she asked one of the other girls in the house, so, quote, her sister, um, asked one of the other girls if she could borrow something to wear. Because remember, the other kids were the caretaker's biological children, so they had a lot more clothes. And the girl was like, "Yeah, sure. Here's a sweater. You can wear this." And although she and Norma were the same age, Norma was much more developed than she
Mm.
was. So when Norma put the sweater on, it was
Tight?
a bit tight. She said when she walked into her first class that day, which was math, in case anyone's wondering, everyone stopped and stared at
They
her.
must have been calculating. I'm still calculating the fact, when am I going to develop? But other than that, okay, we can
I
proceed.
mean, well, I just need my right boob to develop. Like the left one's good. I'm still waiting on the right to come in. But anyway, so they uh they went to recess and a bunch of boys crowded around her and just kept looking at her chest because,
Mm.
ugh, boys.
Mhm.
And then 4 boys walked her home that day.
And so it begins. The
Exactly.
the
She said after
bombshell.
that she said school became much different after that.
Mm.
Classmates started inviting her
It was
over. There were
noticed.
always several boys hanging around her house. And the thing was, it was all pretty innocent. Like, they would just play games outside in the street and just hang out until it was time to go in for dinner. So it was, like, pretty, they're all still kids. A few weeks go by at this point. Norma has turned 13 at this time,
She's still so
and, like,
young. Oh my gosh.
I know, she's so young. And like a lot of other kids her age, she starts getting interested in makeup. So she starts wearing lipstick and darkening her eyebrows, putting on a little mascara, like, fixing
Adultifying
it all up.
herself. That's what, yeah.
Yes. Um, I mean, like, you know how you are at that age where it's just like, I wonder
It's
if I'll try,
exploratory.
like,
Mhm.
yeah. So she walks into school one day wearing makeup for the first time. And mind you, she's still wearing that same sweater because the girl she borrowed it from never asked for it back. And her only other clothes were the ones from the
Torn.
orphanage. And she was like, screw that. So she's got the tight sweater on. She's got the makeup. She's got it going on. And then came the
Ooh la
haters.
la.
Girls started getting super jealous because she was getting all kinds of
Jealousy.
attention.
Ooh.
And it wasn't just girls in her class, it was the seniors, like 17 and 18-year-olds.
Yeah,
They
she looked better
could
than
not
them.
stand it. Yeah, and they start spreading all these rumors about her because when you're a teenager, you're an asshole.
Well,
So
I
they
mean,
start saying
not
that.
just teenage years.
Well, true. I mean, well, there are a lot of assholes in this world. So they start saying that she okay, just keep in mind when I tell you this story, she's 13 years old, okay? They start saying that she was a drunk and spent her evenings having sex with guys on the beach. She's 13! She was like, "Excuse me, I don't drink, and I don't just let boys have their way with me, and BT dubs, I've never even been on a beach in my entire life." She
I
really
was gonna
hadn't,
ask,
despite
like,
being
has she ever
yeah,
been to a beach?
no, she hadn't. Despite being from LA, she was poor.
Right.
She moved from home to home. The beach, it wasn't exactly on the itinerary? But rather than being angry at these girls for spreading rumors, she was loving
Oh, the
it.
attention. We're back to the
She was
attention.
like yeah, she's like, "Oh, girls are jealous of me? They think they're gonna lose their boyfriends to me because I'm more attractive? Well, hell yeah." So she felt
Brainwave.
like her daydreams of attracting attention were finally coming true. So get it, girl. By that summer, she had a boyfriend. He was
She's
21
doing
years
better
old.
than me at this point.
She was 13, but he thought she was 18 because she looked so much older, and I think she
Right.
just didn't bother to correct him. She was like, "Oh, cool." Um, but again, like, you have to think, like, this is back in the day
Right.
'cause
Right.
my grandma met my granddad, she was 13 and he was 21, and the first time that he saw her, he said to his he was, like, with a group of his friends. He said, "That's the woman I'm gonna
Yeah,
marry."
very
And
predatory
she
now,
like
but back in the day, it was very much more
exactly.
accepted, and a lot of
Yeah.
the reasons is, war and, it's just it was a different world then.
It was different. Yeah, it was different. So, one day he invites her to go swimming at the beach. So, she's finally going to the beach for the first time. But, of course, she didn't have a bathing suit. So, she borrowed one from the same girl she
Oh,
borrowed the sweater
boy.
from.
Did it cover anything?
Well, it was obviously too small, um, which left little to the imagination. But she wore it underneath her clothes like you do, and they get to the beach, and she takes off her sweater. Yes, the same sweater. She's been wearing it for months at this point, every single day, the same sweater.
Wow.
So she takes off her
Probably
sweater and
unraveling at
slacks,
this point.
probably, because I mean, she would wash it, like, every day. So she takes her, like, clothes she's wearing over the bathing suit off, and everyone turns to
The
stare.
gawk.
Her boyfriend keeps yelling for her to get in the water. He's like, "Hey, we want let's go swimming," 'cause that's why they were
And
there,
she was
and
like, "Forget you. I got a show."
Norma's like exactly, she's like, "Why should I hide this body in the water?" So s I love this. She starts walking very slowly across the sand toward the water, and then walks slowly down the beach along the water's edge.
Using it as a sand walk, a little catwalk.
Oh, yes. Guys start whistling at her. Some of them got up and walked closer just to get a better look at her. Women stopped what they were doing and just stared. And so it kinda makes me think of Pamela Anderson
Oh,
when
like
she was on the
Baywatch?
Jumbotron,
Okay.
because that's, like, how she got her big break, and, it's just like the same kind of thing. It's like she just had that thing, and you couldn't look away from it. So all this to say, Norma learned at a very young age what it was that got her the attention she craved, and that she had been deprived of for her entire childhood, basically. Despite loving all of the newfound attention she was getting, Norma said she had no interest in or thoughts of sex. She said, quote, "I had no passion in me. I didn't even know what it meant."
Mm.
Which is just interesting to think about. She said she didn't want boys in a sexual way. She legit just wanted to hang out and play games with them in the
All
street
things she was deprived
because,
of.
she's
Right.
13. Like, and then she said at one point, quote, "Occasionally I let one of them kiss me to see if there was anything interesting in the performance. There wasn't." I'm
And
like,
often there's
"Yes,
not.
girl." Eventually, the attention she was getting started to be a bit much, though. Guys were starting to get aggressive and rough, and girls were still constantly accusing her of stealing their boyfriends, and they would just say nasty things about her. So, to help keep the haters at bay, if you will, her Aunt Grace suggested she get married. Now, Norma brushed it off at first. She was like, "I'm too young. Marriage is like not even a thought in my head." But then the host family that she was staying with dropped a bomb on her that they were moving away and they would not be able to take her with them,
She was gonna be
which
left
Norma
behind.
knew. Yeah. And she knew that that would mean she would end up back in the orphanage, which was the last place she wanted to be. So at the age of 16 years old, she agreed to marry a neighbor boy named Jim Doherty. They knew each other because he lived near her host family, but Norma wasn't really into him. She thought he was boring. But again, like, she did not want to go back to the orphanage, and this was kind of her way out of it.
Do what it takes.
After Yeah, so after they married, she became even less interested in sex. She said they didn't really communicate at all and that her marriage didn't bring her happiness or pain. The most important thing it did was end her status as an orphan.
Wow.
Like,
That's pretty
so
profound.
when you think about that, like, it doesn't bring you happiness or pain, you're going through the motions, like, you don't even care. It's just like, that's
And a
shitty.
convenience factor.
Yeah, she said she much preferred hanging out with kids in the street playing games. Like, that's truly literally
Because
all
she's
she
still
wanted to
really a
do.
kid, and she didn't really have a
Yeah,
childhood.
exactly. In 1944, during World War II, Jim joined the Marines, and Norma, who was 18 at the time, got a job in a parachute factory as an inspector, which is, like, badass.
Yeah.
I just think that's the coolest thing. When Jim returned home for overseas, he was like, "You know what? It's time to have a baby. But Norma was not into it. At this point in her life, she absolutely did not want to have kids because she was afraid they would end up in an orphanage like she did. Later in life, though, when she became successful, like, her thoughts on having kids changed and she dreamed of having a baby, but at this point in her life, she was a firm no, hard pass. Ultimately, she and Jim just weren't compatible and they divorced. She was 19 years old.
So, divorce 1, okay.
Yes, that was her
Under
first
20,
marriage. Yeah, but she's out of the system and now she's an adult, so she can't go back into the system.
and she has
So now she realizes, "Shit, I need to earn some
yeah,
money."
she has a little work experience.
Because
It's
she's like,
post-war now?
Yes. So since she learned that her appearance was something that attracted a lot of attention, she figured she could probably get jobs as a model. And she was right. She started going to photography studios and posing for ad layouts. But the problem was these photographers were also looking for work, so they couldn't pay her much. But she made enough to pay her rent and she could afford just one meal a day. But she said, quote, "When you're young and healthy, a little hunger isn't too important."
Oh.
Like
Plus, she was used to
she
it from the stale bread, and
that see, that's exactly it. Like she just
that was the way.
her she started off with a horrible diet. And so when she couldn't afford to eat food, when she was like on her own as an adult, she was like, "Meh, no big deal." She said what is important is loneliness, meaning that being lonely can have a huge factor on your well-being. And she felt that weighed more on her than like not having enough food to eat.
I would concur.
She Yeah, she felt extremely lonely with no family and no real friends, really. She said Sundays were the worst because shops were closed on Sundays,
No
so
one
she
was
couldn't
out.
browse around shopping and she couldn't apply for a job there. So instead, she'd go on walks. And eventually, one of her walks led her to Union Station in Los Angeles, and she started going there every Sunday. She would stay the entire day and just people watch.
I mean, that's a favorite pastime of mine too,
Yes.
in New York.
Yeah, and so many people so many different people passed through
You
there.
never know what one person can do for you.
Well, and at that time, like, I don't even think she was thinking, "Maybe someone can do something for me." Like, I think she just needed to get out, and she just found other
And feel
people
life. Yeah.
fascinating. So while she was living on her own, she was getting the occasional modeling gig, she secretly dreamed of becoming an actor. She knew nothing about acting, had never tried it, had never even shared this dream of hers with anyone. And sometimes, rather than use what little money she had for that day's one meal, she would spend it on speech lesson. Speech. See, now I need speech lessons. She would spend it on speech lessons, which were $1 a piece, which today is around 15 bucks. And she said, quote, "A hamburger will never make you an actress. Speech lessons may."
Ah. I mean,
Which, I mean, you do still need to eat though, Norma. Um, so at night in her tiny Hollywood apartment, she would go over her speech lessons out loud. And here are a couple of phrases that she practiced. The first one is, I'm not gonna get this right. Okay. The first one is, "Ariadne arose from her couch in the snows in the Acrocuronian mountains." Okay, I think I kinda said that right. And the second one was, "Hail to thee, blithe spirit, bird thou never wert." And she would just say these
over and
over and
over.
over and over again.
I think
Yeah.
maybe that's my ticket to, words and being able to say
Saying Horrorwood.
horrorwood. Okay,
Horrorwood.
okay.
You're getting better.
I'll just practice Marilyn's speech lessons, and it'll be a go.
Yeah, I like it. When she started out acting, Norma said there were so many pretty girls who all wanted the same thing, which was to get discovered. And I would say
Even back
nothing
then,
has
that's
changed
crazy to
there.
me.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's the thing. That's what I thought too,
it's so
because
saturated now, I can't even imagine. I would think then it was, like, hardly anybody's in that world, and you
you literally took the words out of my mouth. I was just gonna say it's so saturated now, but it was then too, apparently.
wow.
Yeah. So, she would hang out at cafes and drugstore counters hoping to be discovered, which was a thing, like, drugstore counters were a
Yeah,
thing. The most
those
famous one I
green
think
rivers,
is probably Schwaz's
like fountain
Pharmacy.
drinks.
It was a
Schwartz.
pharmacy, but, like, also served as a soda shop and a lunch
Those
counter.
fountain sodas were huge. I mean, they're pretty good. You ever had a Green River?
Oh,
It's really good.
I've never heard of Green
Okay,
River.
well, we can look it up
Is it
later.
the name of
It's the
a
name of a
is it
fountain
the
drink, and it
name
was green, and it was, like, zesty, kinda like a
Oh,
soda pop, but, like, they were f I don't know, fountain drinks. There was a pharmacy where close to where I lived, and that was what we would do after we would go walk beans. We would get to go to the farm.
walk walk
Yeah,
beans?
like farmland, like, you detassel, walk beans. So that was
I've
our
never
reward. I know, now
I've
I
never
sound like I'm, like, from the 1950s at this point,
You
but
you do.
I assure
I've
you
never heard the expression, "We would walk
I assure
beans."
you that I had more than 2 outfits. I was lucky, I'm thankful for that, and I did have a Sunday dress, so there are 2 things that
But did you live on a farm and walk beans?
well, I didn't
You
live on a
didn't
farm.
live on a farm.
I lived in town, but on the outskirts of town where there was a pasture in my backyard. They had cows, okay? They weren't my cows, but I talked to them every day. Probably why I'm a
I'm
vegetarian.
learning so much about you right now. Um,
Me
okay.
and Norma.
Whew. Alright, yeah, I do feel like you have some similarities happening right
Yeah, I
now.
am blonde.
Um,
I just
we
don't have the rack that she had.
well, and the thing was she actually wasn't even really blonde, so,
True.
that
Well,
works out. I might actually we might do an episode on Schwab's because there's, like, a lot of stuff there. I mean, it got pretty
Okay.
famous. It might be like a Patreon
I
bonus
like that.
once we set up Patreon, which I need to figure out setting up Patreon. Um, but for every so back to Norma. For every young woman aspiring to become an actress, there were just as many creepers preying on that ambition, acting as talent agents, managers, assistants, promising stardom if, of course, they slept with
Of
them.
course. Nothing's really
One
changed
man
that much
I
these
mean,
days.
yeah.
Now it's just out in the
One
open.
man well, and I do think, like, with the Me Too movement, it's things are being talked about more, and so you're so it's maybe not as, prominent as it was, even just a few years ago, and I also know that now there are, what is it? Like, they have to go through, like, a sexual harassment
Oh, like training.
training
Okay.
on
Yeah.
set. Yeah,
We call that
for, like,
Keenan
movies
Safe
and stuff.
Schools at our school, but we do that too. I mean, even as teachers.
Yeah. So, one man that Norma came in contact with was a guy named John Sylvester. And John
Sylvester.
told Norma he was a talent scout for Samuel Goldwyn, which the Goldwyn is the G in MGM. So, like,
Ah,
big deal. He's a big deal. He claimed Mr. Goldwyn was interested in Norma for a role in his next film and wanted her to audition.
finally.
So, Norma was like, cool beans, let's do this, and agreed to meet with John at the studio. So, he gives her a script. She goes to the studio and the audition was to take place in an office there. So she sits on the couch, begins her audition, and as she's reading, John Sylvester interrupts her and says, "Oh, can you lift your dress above your knee?" And she was like, well, "That's weird, but okay, maybe he needs to like see my figure for this role or whatever." So she lifts her dress a little and continues reading, and John says, "Higher."
Oh,
So she lifts it higher. Then John sits
I'm gonna
next
die
to her on
now.
the couch and just starts groping her.
Mm.
So what does she do? She punches him right in the eye. Then she
Hell
kicks him
yes.
and slams her high heel down on his toes and ran the fuck
This chick
out
is
of
savage.
there.
I mean, she's got some
She is
savvy, like, moves.
she
She
is.
has
She is
to.
badass. She's so badass. In addition to men promising to further her career if she slept with them, they were also trying to buy her with fancy dinners and new clothes, even a new apartment. Like one guy offered her a new apartment, but Norma refused to be bought. Probably, I think it stems from because she spent her entire childhood essentially
Being
being
got
bought by these
right.
families. So, despite these men's efforts, Norma never accepted their money or slept with them. She did, however, accompany them to swanky places because she felt there was always a chance she'd get noticed and get offered a job.
Listen,
So she wouldn't sleep with them, And when they offered her money, she wouldn't take it, but she would basically, like, be their arm candies to see if she could get
And
noticed.
sometimes, getting a dinner out of something isn't that bad when you have to
I mean,
endure
maybe it's not the
the
worst.
pain of, like, a conversation with an idiot.
At one point, her car was repossessed, and she needed $50 to get it back, but she refused to call up any of the men that had offered her money. She was like, "Nope, I've gotta figure this out on my own."
Like, this just makes me wanna go back in time and slip her a 50. Like, I just wanna help her.
I mean, she had standards, and she had
Same
respect
girl,
for
same.
herself, and I do feel like I don't know, I just feel like that gets lost in all of the stories
Mhm.
that we hear about her. It's like she went through so much shit, and she was not there to take a handout. She was like, "No, I've gotta figure this out on my own." So, the thing about LA is it's a huge place, and it's very spread out, and without a car, because it got
Mm.
repossessed, Norma couldn't get around. And obviously, Uber wasn't a thing yet, so she couldn't get to casting offices or talent agencies to try and get work. She was just stuck. But it wasn't long before a photographer that she had worked with previously called her up, and he asked if she would be interested in posing naked for a calendar. Here's the thing, she didn't have a problem posing nude. She said nudity and sex are the most commonplace things in the world, and she didn't know why people got all weird
I mean,
about
that's how
it.
we were born. We were nude when we were
True. I
born,
mean,
so
yeah.
it's kinda natural.
Exactly, and that's how she felt about it. She was just like, "Yeah, it's no big deal." She was concerned, however, that if she ever did make it as an actress, the photos could have a damaging effect on her
Mhm.
career. But
I mean, that's
the
why I haven't been
photographer
in Playboy
promised.
yet. I don't know if I could work at a school, so there's that.
I
Just
mean,
kidding.
yeah, this I'm sure, like, the school would be like, "Kaylee, we
You were in the
don't ask
July.
don't ask us how. Don't ask us how, but we happen to see your Playboy photos, so you're fired." Um,
We saw you in the July
so
magazine, and, we have some questions.
But the I can just I'm just picturing, like, either of us trying to pose for Playboy, and it would be the
Oh,
most
girl.
comical debacle. Oh my god. But the photographer promised Norma she would be unrecognizable in the photos, and he said, "I'll pay
S
you 50
smear the
bucks."
face or what like, not have a face
Well,
or
like, probably, like, like, kind of like,
oh, d
having her
turned.
turn in a
Okay, okay.
way or, like, a little something covering her face, so, like, you really couldn't tell, "Is that her? Is it not?" Like, he was like, "Don't worry, it's gonna be tasteful, blah, blah, blah," and she had worked with this guy before, so she was like, "Cool, cool, cool."
So she
So
trusted him.
yeah.
Okay.
So, he's like, "I'll pay you 50 bucks," which was exactly how much she needed to get her car back. So she's like, "You know what? Okay."
The math skills came in
And
handy.
she made her 50 bucks, she got her car back the very next day. So Norma's doing her thing. She's got her car. She can go on auditions now. And eventually she landed a small role in a movie and was put on a 6-month contract with a studio. And when I say small role, like she literally just walks past another character, waves and says hello, and then moves on.
Gotta get
But
a break
her part was
somehow.
a I mean, true. Like you start small and then you work your way up. And this is back when like studios would put you under contract, so, like, they could use you as bit players and be like, "Oh, yeah, call up Norma, we'll have her be the waitress in this." So it was a little different
Okay.
than how it is now. So she got this 6-month contract, so that was a pretty big deal. Her part, however, was eventually cut from the movie, but she didn't really care because she knew she wasn't a good actor yet, and she wanted to get better. So she spent her salary on acting, dancing, and singing lessons. She read a bunch of books. She would sneak scripts off of set and practice reading them out loud in front of her mirror at
So
home.
she really had a passion. I mean, she wanted to perfect her craft. I mean, this is something that she
She
was
did.
going after.
That's the thing. Like, she wasn't just like, oh, I'm going to go be an actress. Okay, great. I've got this contract. She wanted to be good. And she was doing everything in her power to make that happen. So I mean, the fact that she would, like, sneak scripts off of set and then, like, read them over and over, just practicing. She also said she practiced posing and walking like a queen
Ooh,
because she was just trying to become the best version of
noted.
herself. I know,
So
right? Like,
when I walk downstairs today, if I'm posing and practicing like a queen, just, write it off.
you're just becoming the best version of yourself. That's all. Although I would say, like, I think we already are queens, but, um, so to that I say, okay, I have to say, like, hopefully this isn't guys, if you're listening out there, I am sorry if my voice is echoing because it's echoing in my headphones right now. I'm trying to, like, move the mic. Um, the casting director of the studio at the time, he was a man by the name of Ben Lyon. He was also an actor. He saw something in her and he said, "You know, I think you need a more glamorous name, like something more
This is where it
glamorous
comes in,
than Norma Doherty," because she was still going by her married name. So she was Norma Doherty, on all these
which
auditions
is
and
not
stuff.
a smooth name to say. I probably couldn't even say
It
it. I
is,
can't even say
and
whatever.
I'm having trouble just saying it, like, and I'm reading it in front of me. And she was like, "You know what? I think you're right." Especially because Doherty wasn't really her name anymore since she was divorced. So he suggested Marilyn as a first name because he'd worked with an actress named Marilyn Miller and said Norma reminded him of her. She was like, "Cool, cool, cool. Let me think on that." She goes to her Aunt Grace and she says, "Look, this studio exec thinks it would be a good idea if I changed my name, and he suggested Marilyn. What do you think?" And Grace said, "Yeah, Marilyn would actually go really well with your mother's maiden name." And Norma was like, "Well, shit, I never even knew my mom's maiden name. What is it?" To which Grace replied, "Monroe." Turns
Oh.
out Gladys, Norma's mom, was related to President Monroe, and Norma
What?
was a direct descendant. Yes. But Norma chose not to tell anyone about being related to a president because she wanted to make a name for
Ooh,
herself,
interesting.
literally and figuratively, and make it on her own.
Wow, and then the JFK thing comes later. Wow.
So, goodbye, Norma Jean.
Hello,
Hello,
Marilyn
Marilyn
Monroe.
Monroe.
Love it.
And this is where we're going to end part one.
Fascinating.
I think, I mean, yeah, it's just seeing like, or, reading about all the things that she went through as a kid. And you just kind of see like how she works to improve herself, and she didn't want a handout, which again, like, is so, like, kind of mind-boggling, but, like, I have mad respect for it because she didn't have shit growing
Well,
up.
and it gives me like there's mass amounts of empathy for her because honestly, I don't know much about her and all I know is like some storm later in her life that I was like, "Oh, maybe it was just because she was in Hollywood and an elite, right?" But
Yeah.
now I have such a background on her. I'm like, "Wow, she really did create something for herself by eliminating the factors that were bringing her down all the time."
I mean, and I don't even know that she, like, could really eliminate those. She just worked as hard as she could to overcome it or to get through it.
That's
And I
fair,
mean,
that's fair, yeah.
granted, like, later in life, she does resort to other ways of
Mhm.
coping, and we'll get into all of that in part 2, but, yeah, that was part 1. Hope you liked the learning about the early life of Miss Marilyn Monroe, and, Kaylee, do you have anything you would like to add at this moment? A palate cleanser, if you will. I will say, though, that wasn't, like, a super gruesome episode, but,
It's leading
I mean, this
into
isn't
I
like a
mean, a lot of times gruesome things or crimes don't happen without a backstory, right? I mean,
well, yeah, and, I mean, shitty, shitty things did
happen.
happen to her, um, but, yeah, we'll get in part 2, we'll get more into, like, her career, her relationships, and then, like I said, it's probably gonna be a three-parter because I just don't think I could get it into 2
I
parts,
want more
I
though,
think.
so I'm all for it.
Okay, good. I mean, I think to do Marilyn Monroe justice, like, you have to divide it up and you have to, like, dive deep.
Absolutely. Uh, you know, because one of her most iconic films was The Misfit, and we're kind of putting that out there that if and when we have our listeners, they're also misfits. Uh, my only palate
We're
cleanser
all misfits
today
here.
is asking you a question. Do you know where the word misfit comes from? I mean, do you know the backstory of that, or do you have?
Like, the etymology of misfit?
Yeah.
I don't. Are you going to tell me?
I sure am. So it's a 19th
Okay.
century word, probably by the end of the 1800s or whatnot, and it really meant a garment that fits badly. So already I
Okay.
resonate with this word because I'm like, often do my garments fit badly. So I'm already like, well, I'm a misfit, clearly. Um, I'm still thinking about the sweater that she was wearing, and like
I mean, the fact that she wore that every
every
single
day.
day for months. Months.
So it was almost like a precursor. It was like this thing that, she already had, right? And it's just funny that she eventually comes into this movie, right? But then what happens is that later on, it kind of formed into primarily meaning outcast or oddball. Because of the
Mhm.
fit in both cases, it's like the prefix is "miss" means wrong, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that it's just like I feel like I can be a misfit sometimes, like, I'm an
I think we're all
oddball, and
misfits.
so I think we're all kinda misfits, right? And, yeah, I just thought
And
it'd be cool
she
to define that word.
thank you. Thank you for that, Miss
And
Kaylee.
and also that's funny, that's what my students call me.
I
Um
know. I said
Um,
it.
so also in slang though, a misfit is a person who is poorly adapted to a situation or environment. So it just really hones in it goes into the fact of like kind of like her upbringing. And I
Oh,
just love
yeah.
that later in life she's in this film, which by the way, I've never
Well,
seen The Misfits with Clark Gable.
oh, I watched it. We'll talk
Okay,
about it.
okay, great.
But yeah, she always considered herself she called herself a Hollywood misfit, and yeah, that's I think that's well, that played a big role in, like, wanting to, like, name our listeners misfits and ourselves because we all are, and we're all just here, and hopefully you all will stay here and tune in for part 2. And in the meantime, you can check out our Instagram because we are gonna post something, eventually, at Horrorwood Podcast. That's HORRORPOD. Nope, that's not it.
I can't
It's
say it and you can't spell it. Boy, are we a
can't.
team.
It's at HORRORWOOD podcast. I think there's a Facebook page or a group or
Yeah.
something. I think I made that. I don't think there's anything on it yet, but we're getting there. At Horrorwood Podcast, and then you can check out Twitter at Horrorwood Pod because Horrorwood Podcast was too many letters.
And maybe I'll make my first Twitter. I don't know. Never had it. We'll see.
You've never had Twitter?
No.
Oh, I have it, but I never use it. I mean, it's not my go-to. Um, but I read everything else on it. Like, I'm on
It's a
it,
little
and I'll look at
bluebird.
stuff, you know?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. But I just, like, I'm terrible with social media, but
We'll
anyway,
get better.
hopefully I'll get better. We'll see. Um, and we just wanna say thanks for listening, and we'll see you when we won't see you, but I would love to. I'm sure you're all gorgeous. We will be talking to you again in a week.
Fare thee well, Mafia honey.